Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our board meeting in SFRS headquarters. Can I welcome everyone, board members, SLT and other executive colleagues, those on VC joining us and those in the room who are observing. I'm going to invite all the members to introduce themselves and SLT colleagues sitting around the table. So for those who are not aware, I'm Kirsty Darwent. I'm the chair of the SFRS Board, and I'm going to go to my right and go around the table.
Morning all, Ross Haggart, Interim Chief Officer.
Morning everybody, Stuart Stevens, Interim Deputy Chief Officer.
Morning, Nick Barr, Board Member and Chair of the Service Delivery Committee.
Morning, Steve Barton, Board Member.
Morning, Malcolm Caton, Board Member.
Good morning, Stuart Ballingham, Board Member.
Morning, Angelina Foster, Board Member.
Morning, John Thompson, Acting Director of Finance and Procurement.
David Farris, Director of Service Delivery.
Morning, David Lockhart, Director of Service Development.
Morning, Andy Watt, Director of Training, Safety and Assurance.
Liz Barnes, Director of People and Organisational Development. Matty Riley, Board Member.
Brian Baverstock, Board Member.
Tim Wright, Board Member.
Good morning, Ali Cameron, Board Support Manager.
And we're also joined by Fiona Thorburn, who's the Deputy Chair of the SFRS Board, and she is on VC. All other board members are present in the room. Ali, we've got some apologies for absence. If you can share those, please.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies are from Leslie Bloomer and Paul Sollard, board members, and also from Ian Morris, the Acting Director of Asset Management. There's also apologies from Mark McAteer, the Director of Strategic Plan Performance Communications, for the public part of the meeting. We'll join for the private session. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. You will see that we have some issues that we are intending to take in the private session of the meeting. Are we content that all of those should be on the private agenda? Lovely, thank you, that's great. Is there anything on the public agenda that we think should raise any concerns and should be heard in private? No, thank you. And as you all know, whenever possible, we will be doing all our business in public. So thank you for approving that. Declarations of interest. Any interest, financial, non-financial, that are relevant to the business of the meeting? No, thank you. If any were to emerge during the course of the meeting, please just indicate and we will address them. That takes us into the minute of our previous meeting for amendment and potential approval. That was the 30th of June. Were there any issues in those minutes that we need to address? Nick, please.
Nick Barr, and I'd just like to suggest a change to the wording on 10.4.1, where it gave an overview of the service delivery part. The fifth bullet point, there's the word highlighted there, which gives an impression that this was the first time that this was highlighted, the independency on the CCF. And I'd just like to suggest that we change that to, which reinforced the interdependency on the command and control's future, because it's been known about for some considerable time.
Yep, I'm content with that. Other board colleagues? Yep.
Furthermore, there was just two small changes. There's a further bullet point, risk reporting on high risk firefighting. Sorry, it should be read high rise firefighting.
Yep.
And then the items brought to the next meeting include a deep dive focusing on the home fire safety.
You've got those. Okay. Subject to those amendments. Brian, please.
Thank you. Just 1.10.2.2, the final bullet point, which begins National Fraud Initiative and ends to improve the level of self-declaration. After the word declaration, we should have of interests across the service, because it implies something different. So if we could add in.
Happy at that. It's not random declarations we want, it's specific declarations of interest.
Preferably, yeah.
No, happy with that. Are we all content to approve the minutes subject to those amendments? Lovely. Thank you very much. That takes us into the action log. Ali, can you take us through that, please?
Thank you, Chair. Ali Cameron, Board Support Manager. So just, if you refer to page 17 of the pack and page 1 of 3 in relation to the action log, if you see that we've got 5 actions in total, 4 of which have been marked blue as completed. Just to confirm that the board are content with the position statement updates and for those to be removed. Also suggesting that the remaining item, which is marked green, which is on target, should the email be circulated as detailed within the action log, be concluded that this also will be removed accordingly. Thank you, Chair.
Are we happy to note and approve the closed actions? Lovely, thank you. Decision log?
Thank you, Chair. So just referring board members to the decision logs from the meeting of the last meeting, just to confirm that you're content with the position statement updates in relation to the impact assessments for both decisions, and as you will be aware, these are for a year in advance. So referring to item 22, can I just highlight to board members that this is actually a repeat of item 21, and the wording should state that following approval by the SFRS Board and Scottish Government provided their authority to settle the claim in September 2021, Clyde & Co solicitors continued negotiations with the pursuer and subsequently agreed settlement of £50,000, which was within authority provided. Work is continuing to finalise the remaining defence and pursuer costs, and regular meetings are held with Clyde & Co solicitors to monitor this and other ongoing claims. So that will be amended accordingly within item 22, and that refers to the meeting on the 26th of August 2021. Again, it's reflecting a year past that date. So just confirm that you're content with that update. And just to highlight also, with regards to item 12, page 2 of 13, there's just a slight amendment to the wording required within that detail that's stated there. So in the second sentence towards the end, it just says the report also describes the actions that have been completed in line with the procurement strategy. So we just need to add in the words the actions, so you're aware of that. That concludes that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are we content on that basis to note the decision log?
Yes.
Thank you. That takes us into the Chair's report, and you will see that my diary is within the body of the papers. There's nothing in particular that I want to flag in terms of those dates. I suppose the 2 running themes are pay and meetings with the government. We have no formal updates around pay at this stage. Negotiations at the NJC around pay for firefighters on a UK basis are ongoing, and we are having ongoing conversations with government and others around a potential way forward, but at the moment there is no formal update around any of that. The other main issues are ongoing conversations with government about the implications of our future budget and their strategic financial review that they have announced. Again, we have no formal position on that, but it's just to flag that that's the other thing that is ongoing at the moment, as we meet regularly with government to explain to them the implications of future spend and where we might end up with that in the longer term. So I'm happy to take any comments or questions. I can see that Fiona has her hand up. Fiona, please come in.
Thanks, Kirsty. Fiona Thorburn, board member. It was just a question around Wendy Wilkinson, I think imminent retirement, on whether we knew who was taking over from her.
Yes, we in fact attended Wendy's last formal meeting with us yesterday, and I have to say she was looking very well on it. So she is leaving, and we've got a meeting in September for the replacement, who is Maureen Rooney, I believe, who's an experienced civil servant within government who has moved over to be our new lead civil servant. We've got some continuity, obviously, through other members of the sponsor unit, and there shouldn't be any gap or major implications of that change.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions on my diary? Thank you. That's noted. Ross, would you like to update?
Thanks, Chair. Again, it's a diary update for myself. I won't go through it in any great detail. It's for July and August. The only thing that I would highlight is this week. We've got the 50th anniversary commemoration of Kilburney Street, which all board members will have been invited to. We've got a short ceremony up at the necropolis. We're then down at Glasgow Cathedral for a remembrance service, and then Glasgow Council have very kindly put on a civic reception for us as well. And then on Sunday, myself and Stuart, and I think maybe other board members have been invited to attend. The Fire Brigade Union are unveiling a red plaque at Kilburney Street itself, so we'll certainly attend to represent the service at that ceremony, and I think board members might be going to that as well. So there's nothing else I want to highlight apart from that happening this week, but again, happy to take any questions on anything else I've been getting up to over the past couple of months.
You obviously know what he's been getting up to.
Yeah.
It's an interesting choice.
Any comments or questions around Rothie's diary? No, happy to note. Lovely, thank you. That then takes us into our committee report. And we have Fiona Thorburn with us online to update on the Change Committee. Fiona, please come in.
Thanks, Kirsty. So the last meeting was past yesterday, 15th of August. The committee scrutinised a number of things. We looked at the low carbon appliance dossier, which actually led to a broader discussion in terms of the importance of the committee getting early sight of major projects, and the importance of the work that's ongoing to establish and maintain discipline around the business change life cycle. We looked at people training, finance and asset systems project. It's a standing item that we look at every committee meeting. And in the past, there's been discussion around the risk and complexity associated with this significant programme. So the committee welcomed the update that described a benefits-led approach to establish scope and focus on high-yield end-to-end processes. We also welcomed the news that we are engaged with Scottish Government in terms of potential to share in some way their procurement of an Oracle ERP in the same sort of space, and those conversations are ongoing. Update on the portfolio office work, and again, very supportive of the work that's ongoing there. We looked at the new look reporting and very much welcomed that, good detail, and really got what we've been looking for, which is really good to know. And finally, in the private session, again, a standing item, we had a full update on the Command and Control Futures programme, and the board will be updated later this morning in private session. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. Any questions at all on those minutes? Lovely, thank you. We have noted those. Audit and risk assurance meeting. Brian.
Yeah, thank you. The last meeting was on the 28th of June. I provided a verbal update at the meeting on the 30th, so I won't repeat that, but obviously happy to take any questions.
Content to note. Lovely, thank you very much. Audit and Risk Assurance Committee annual report to the accountable officer.
Yeah, thank you. That was one of the papers taken at the meeting on the 28th. Audit committees are required to produce an annual report to the board and the accountable officer, and that's what you have before you today. The essence of the report is for the committee to conclude, hopefully confirm that it's satisfied with the assurances that it's received through the course of the year in relation to governance, risk and internal control. So in response to that question, pleased to report that the committee broadly was satisfied with those assurances coming in particular from internal audit, external audit, HMFSI and so on. So the committee presents this report to the board. I'm happy to take any questions on it. But I should also add that it's a key document that feeds into the annual governance statement.
Absolutely. So it is an important document from that perspective. Any comments or questions at all on that annual report? Gosh, we're a very content board today. Thank you very much. I will put that down to the very high quality of the reports that we've had so far. Thank you very much.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Absolutely, please do. People Committee, Mary.
Similar to Brian, actually, I gave a verbal update at our June meeting and the minutes are attached, so I don't really have any much more to add to them. So if you have any questions.
We will note those unless there's any additional questions. Thank you. Service Delivery Committee. Nick.
Don't let us down now, Nick.
Even shorter. The update and the papers were provided at the last meeting, and the Service Delivery Committee is due to meet next week in Dundee.
Okay, so we don't have anything further to report. Yeah, I think quite a lot of this is reflecting the time of year that we are at, that actually we're zipping through these pretty quickly because we have considered them elsewhere. Thank you, we note your update. That then takes us into the resource budget monitoring report. John, please, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. John Thompson, Acting Director of Finance and Procurement. So present the resource budget monitoring report for the current financial position. That's as at July, in the end of July. It shows a current underspend against budget of 0.615 million, with a forecasted year-end overspend of just over £39,000. Board members may recall previously that the forecast was significantly higher, 1.474, so just highlight the fact that we are revising the forecast down, and I'll explain a little bit more around why that has happened. Before I do that, in terms of the forecast position, it's also important to recognise that ESMCP is excluded from the forecast, and the current forecasted cost for ESMCP is £331,000, just in case board members wanted to know that position. In addition, I've added some additional summary information on the report as part of the kind of year-to-date variances at 3.3 and at the forecast of 3.4. Just thought it might just give a better overview of what's actually happening in terms of the position. A number of areas that I would like to highlight to the board, standing items, I guess, budget environments, financial risk, forecast, and the budgeted savings that are appendix to the report. In terms of budget environments, there was a couple of low value environments taken in July, and that was in relation to Moroccan terrorist attack allowance and also in terms of the training overtime. So we pulled some of those down from the contingency element within our overall budget. In terms of financial risk, the main financial risk is really that we still in a risk of overspend overall, given what the Chair has mentioned in terms of pay negotiations, will have a direct impact on our overall financial position. Obviously, our budgeted position is a 2% pay award, and therefore anything beyond that would give significant pressure in terms of our finances, and would also have a knock-on effect to the following year and a further impact in terms of the resource spending review, which is obviously giving us significant challenges going forward. In addition to that, we have inflationary pressures. Everyone knows about the position in terms of the cost of living, but we are now starting to see that inflationary pressure come through in our contracts. Most contracts have an element of either RPI or CPI as a normal indicator to inflate the cost of the contract. So we'll start to see more costs coming through, I think, in the second half of this year. And obviously, again, that may also have a knock-on effect in terms of future years. So that pressure around overspend still exists, but it's pleasing to know that in terms of the overall forecast, we are forecasting a budgeted position effectively. So in terms of that forecast, three main areas to highlight: the employee costs, property and transport costs. In terms of employee costs, the forecast is £119,000 underspent, and that compares to a 1.167 million overspend previously reported. And the main reason for that is the reduction in the whole time overtime forecast, and also there has been an increase in the on-call underspend forecast. I would probably highlight the mitigating actions that have been undertaken by the STAG and the operational OAG, and those actions are now beginning to be fed through in terms of the financial implications, and the overtime is effectively being managed really well and balanced off against the maintaining availability. I'm conscious that I'm presenting the financial position. There is a real impact in terms of operational, and whilst we're managing that financial position, it's that operational impact that we have to be mindful of and aware of. In terms of the non-employee elements, the property forecast is 351.351 million, and that's just slightly higher in terms of underspend than previously, and that's primarily down to the rates, where we benefited from a kind of 2% rates as opposed to 4%, which we had budgeted for, and we've also seen some further savings in terms of our energy consumption. So we're actually saving money in terms of the electricity through all of the investment that we've had from Scottish Government in our stations in terms of solar panels, etc. And that's now fed through. Unfortunately, as well, whilst we're reducing the consumption, obviously the prices in relation to electricity have soared. So we are trying to balance off our overall utilities. The final thing that I wanted to mention was on transport costs, and again, primarily that overspend of 0.752 million forecast as a result of the fuel prices, and that's just it's been a feature throughout the year, and I suspect it will be a volatile position throughout the rest of this year. But that's the main variance on the kind of resource budget position. Appendix C highlights the budgeted savings. The overall position is 5.682 million forecasted savings compared to the budget of 5.882, so slightly below where we want to be in terms of budgeted savings. We have also included the RAG status around those budgeted savings, even introduced a new colour of purple, which suggests it's better than green. So we'll take board members' comments on that. But the idea is to show some differentiation between those budgeted savings and how we are managing the position. And that is me, and I will open it up for questions from board members.
Thank you. And can I start it off just by saying I found the additional information and the different way of presenting it very helpful, particularly around environments. So that for me, I certainly appreciated as a non-financial expert. So thank you. Comments, questions on our budget?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please come in.
John, just on the employee cost line, if we follow that trajectory of positive now, adverse at the end of the year, is that going to give us a further challenge into next year, or is there something strange going on that's going to stop it?
Nothing strange going on. I guess the overall, the main driver is on the whole time and around maintaining availability, and it's that gap in terms of where we are resourced compared to a target operating model. Obviously, what could change, it will be around that target operating model, but that's a decision for another day, I guess. So will it have an impact going forward? Absolutely, because we will maintain that deficit in terms of the particularly around the whole time, and we'll have to factor that in terms of overtime and managing the skills that we need going forward.
Could be quite a big number.
It could be a substantial number. It already is a substantial number in terms of overtime impact, but it's one that we effectively manage, and I guess what I'm highlighting today is that we have started to take some of those mitigating actions to try and manage it within this financial year, but there will be further pressure into the next financial year, especially as that is the start of the resource spending.
Mary, mine is a really simple question. Just around hydrant maintenance is hugely overspent, and just within the first 4 months. I'm just looking for some reassurance that's not going to continue to overspend it anywhere near that rate.
No, so one of the actions, and I'm happy to bring David in, but one of the actions was to progress quite a lot of the kind of backlog around hydrant maintenance towards the end of the last financial year. And we've obviously raised orders with the supplier to make that happen. And that's fed through into the first half of this year. But we are not raising orders, and therefore we can manage the overall position. But obviously we need to make sure that we keep an eye on the overall hydrant maintenance, because yes, that is around water supply. But David, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
David Farris, Director of Service Delivery. Not a great deal more to add to that. We've certainly, over the course of the last year, had ongoing discussions with Scottish Water around about those ongoing repairs, the nature of those repairs, and the remuneration for those repairs, and there was some dubiety over where that was going. That was resolved, and we started to move forward with a plan as John's articulated. So yeah, we're now on course, and the backlog should be clear, that we should get back into a natural rhythm around about those payments.
Brian?
Yeah, thank you. John, resisting the temptation to comment on purple. Perhaps more important, I mean, it's great to see a balanced budget being forecast, but my kind of concern is how realistic is that given the economic conditions. And I guess what I'm looking for is one, your thoughts on how realistic that is given the economic conditions, and two, you know, how are we placed in terms of having to respond? Should it prove to be less positive than you're forecasting? And in particular, the efficiencies that you talk about, you know, is there scope within that plan to accelerate the plan, to increase the quantum of the plan? And finally, is there anything you can say in terms of Scottish Government's position and the discussions that you've had with them about the possibility of a significant overspend of the budget and how they would react to it? Apologies for that being such a lengthy question.
Thank you, Brian. It's a really valid point. I guess what I'm presenting is the forecast based on what we know today. And I guess equally you would say, well, let's look at the environment that we're within, and we would perhaps understand that it's likely to lead to significant budgetary pressures. But until that is known, it's difficult to include that within the overall forecast, because we don't know what the final position might look like. Having said that, what is our capacity to then adjust and reflect on where that might be? We have made it very clear to government that we have a budgeted position of a 2% pay award, and therefore anything beyond 2% we don't believe is fundamentally affordable for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. So whilst we can accelerate, or we could look to accelerate savings, we could look to try and identify further efficiencies, it's within that context of you know, it's not an affordable position for the service moving forward. So we cannot just through efficiencies claw back any potential pay award above the kind of 2%. If we're talking around figures around the kind of 5%, it's a fairly substantial figure, and one that we have to think about in terms of sustainability going forward. So I'm hoping I'm answering the question, Brian, but please, if there's anything else that you would like to clarify, then please come back in.
Yeah. I mean, I could respond and say, well, that's exactly what a forecast is supposed to do, but I'm not going to do that because I realise the sensitivities round about all this and the uncertainties round about this. But probably where I would like to press a little bit more is on the plan B, you know, and I'm not looking for details of those contingencies, just a bit of assurance round about it, because £500,000 of efficiencies is not a lot of wriggle room, and it's just, as I say, no detail, but just to understand whether, you know, scenarios are being considered that would consider a more pessimistic position. And can I connect it to that? I mean, you mentioned that this is merely the financial position that is the operational part of it. I'm keen to understand, perhaps in terms of timing, when that may become a kind of real issue.
I'll probably bring in operational colleagues in terms of the performance side of it, but just going back to understand the forecast, you're absolutely right. A forecast is a forecast, but equally we've got to be mindful of it. We're in a negotiating position as well, so I wouldn't want to put something into a public document that would then be referred to later on. So yes, I am aware of the kind of range of possibilities and what we could do to manage the position. I think the only thing that I would say is that we have always managed the financial position to bring us back to a balanced position, and we do that through working collectively with our operational colleagues around what actually is required in terms of resourcing, and balance that off against the overall community risk. And that's exactly what we would still be doing today. So there are a number of levers that we can pull to try and manage the financial position, but equally that has a direct impact in terms of the operational performance. So you just have to be careful as to which levers we're pulling at which time, and what that will mean in terms of operational performance. So I don't know if either.
I'm going to bring Roth in a minute.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
Are we on the same theme, Steve? Are you wanting to explore the same area or a different area?
Different area.
Different area, thank you. I think helpful, Roth, is for you to perhaps address some of the wider complexities, including the operational aspects.
Yeah, and I might bring in David in particular in terms of the operational aspects, so thanks for that, Brian. And I think you've probably seen from the last board meeting and the predicted forecast to this, there's a fair bit of noise in the system. In terms of the here and now, we are managing the inflationary position, and we think we can manage that within budget. So we could probably set that to one side, albeit we're acutely aware of the fact that inflation is only going in one way at the moment. But we're fairly confident in terms of that inflationary management within the existing budget. As John said, the forecast is based on what we know in the here and now, and clearly if those assumptions change, then we will need to change the forecast based on that. In terms of the specific driver at the moment, which is effectively a depleted target operating model and having to use overtime in order to maintain availability of key resources. So as you all know, we already came into this most recent period with the depleted target operating model because of the restrictions on recruitment, because of COVID, and now we've got the pension remedy work that we're working through, and we've got dedicated groups, the staff and tactical action group working with the operational availability group reporting into SLT on that position. And in terms of the quite a big swing from last month to this month, just to give you some reassurances, we are hopefully on a more consistent trajectory, but there's been a lot of work being done in terms of how we manage that overtime bill and how that ties into appliance availability. So there's a very strong management of that through the operational availability group, and we are also learning as we go in terms of what that forecasting looks like, because it's really difficult to get a correlation between target operating model and how that impacts upon overtime costs, because it's not just raw numbers, there's skills to take into account as well. So I think there's a combination of honing in on what a reasonable forecast would be as we learn as the year goes on, and also a stronger management on that availability as well. And in terms of ongoing discussions with the Scottish Government, I think it would be fair to say that in any discussion, certainly I have, along with the Chair, and I know that John has with Scottish Government at the moment, they are absolutely dominated by pay for this year. And clearly, the position with pay as that goes forward, we are engaging heavily with Scottish Government. It's not up to me to comment on other organisations and things that have been settled recently, but we are absolutely having those conversations and providing all the information that we need to provide to Scottish Government in terms of what scenarios may play out going forward. So loads of stuff going on in that environment. So please be assured that those conversations are ongoing, because that could be a significant change to an assumption in here. And I could probably say more about that in the private session if that would be helpful.
No, that's really helpful, Ross. Thank you.
David, would you like to add anything around the operational implications and availability?
I actually don't think there's a great deal to add. I think that's a really good overview of exactly where we are with that. And I think John talked about the amount of levers that are involved and the complexity of that landscape. And I think the Chief's covered that fairly well. So, okay.
Thank you. Steve.
Thank you. A good, clear report, easy to read, and lots of detail there. Thank you very much, John. And also, clearly, we should all be pleased about the improvement in the forecast. So that's good news too, particularly in such a turbulent year. My eye's drawn to Appendix C, the line about agency and contractors, where I think the number included in the budget is 128, and the forecast to be delivered is an adverse variance of 332. So overall, that's an adverse of 460. I wonder if you could explain where that's being incurred, and give us some reassurance that there are controls in place to manage that as the year goes forward.
Yeah, so thank you, Steve. So just to give context, we've had quite a number of agency staffs throughout both last year and this year, and in particular around the ICT areas, we're trying to bring in additional skills, and we've also had that continuing challenge around recruitment, and that was reflected when we set the budget for 2022-23, where we recognised that what was described as a kind of recruitment profile, where we anticipated some savings effectively throughout the period as it took us time to recruit resources going forward. So the reality has been that we've had to continue with those agency staff for longer than perhaps we had anticipated at the point of budget, but that's balanced off against the support staff line, where you'll see the forecast is higher in terms of savings being delivered. So we're managing that overall position, Steve, between bringing in resources through either temporary or permanent resources, and trying to balance that off against the agency position. But it's one that we are closely monitoring, and hopefully in future reports we'll start to see a more balanced position. But you're correct to highlight that large swing between what was anticipated in the budget and what we now have.
That's very helpful, thanks. Are there controls in place to manage any new agency appointments?
I'm not sure I can answer that question. Liz, do you want to?
Yeah, every vacancy, whether it's permanent or temporary, is going through a stringent process because of the spending review activity. So we're questioning every vacancy as it arises. So yes.
Thank you.
Just to give further reassurance to that, we as well as the focus that we give on a monthly basis at SLT to the financial position, there's also a kind of a budgetary subgroup that we've pulled together. It was pulled together in the run-up to setting this year's budget, and it's continued, and that meets on a quarterly basis, chaired by Stuart. So on a quarterly basis, some key SLT colleagues come together and have a deep dive into the budgetary position quarterly, and a lot of that is particularly focused round about support staff vacancies, management of that, agency staff and things like that. So it is getting an additional focus over and above what we would normally give it, Steve.
Yes, Angelina.
Thank you. So one of the many downsides of the tyranny of annual budgets is sometimes that in order to do that, to address the pressure of achieving a balanced budget in year, sometimes it makes us take a decision that isn't always compatible with the longer term aspirations. Yeah. And that isn't fatal necessarily if we can look to next year and the year after being better than this year, or no worse. But clearly, I think we're anticipating tougher years in the next 2 or 3 years. So that's the context of my question, which is, can you assure the board that in balancing off the operational and the financial pressures, you haven't had to take any decisions to achieve financial balance that go against the grain of what you might choose to do for some of the more strategic, longer term, redesigned, for example, decisions? Or indeed, even better, if I could put it more positively, have you managed to build in to any of those decisions things that are, quiet building blocks for some of the future changes? Do you see what I'm trying to tease out here?
It's a really good question, Angelina. I'm going to bring Roth in initially on that.
It's a really good question, and I'll probably have double negatives in my answer, and Angelina. We're acutely aware. We obviously had a session 2 weeks ago, I think, with the board in terms of the initial preparations for the resource spending review, and again we're working through that with SLT, and we're now looking to the 2 to 4 year period. So there's a lot of work going on in that particular space. What I would say is I am not, I can't think of any decisions that we have taken across the recent past when we've known the context of the resource spending review that would conflict with that direction of travel and would put us in any additional difficulties, if that makes sense. So it's not been at the forefront of our minds in terms of taking decisions, but we have always had it as a kind of a North Star and understanding that's where we're potentially moving towards, and I don't think we're doing anything at the moment that would be conflicting with that, but it's fairly compatible with it. Less Collie, and I'm happy for SLT colleagues to correct me if I've neglected anything, but I think we're very much managing the here and now with an eye on what the potential future will look like.
Yes, John, please come in.
Yeah, no, I was just going to reiterate exactly what Ross has said. It's we have very much looked at our decision making, although some of those decisions may be in the short term, particularly around kind of tactical savings for next year, but still have an eye on, well, what does that mean in years 2, 3 and 4, and effectively, because you don't want to make, as you described, you don't want to make a decision now that actually stops us from making a good decision going forward. And I do believe that we are looking at some of those tactical things, but in the balance of what that strategic view should be.
Liz?
One of the things that may present that type of challenge is the People Training Finance and Assets programme. So that is currently being reviewed to look at different ways of achieving what it is we need to achieve. But there would be a real red flag if we happen to compromise too much on that, because it creates so many dependencies for efficiencies, creativity, innovation, and achieving what we need going forward. So that may well be something that would present that type of challenge, but we're not there yet. But it's definitely a red flag for me if we have to make a financial decision that compromises what we would achieve from that programme, because it's so core to everything else we want to achieve.
Davey?
Yeah, I think if I'm picking this up correctly, just in terms of assurance around about not compromising community or firefighter safety through this process, and I think that we can guarantee that. And as much as that, certainly through the COVID-19 period, through adversity, we were forced into making some decisions around about crew and availability, and it's given us the ability to test that during that period, and look at our approach to that, and have that assured by HMFSI in terms of the thematic audit that was carried out on our COVID-19 and our COVID-19 recovery plans. So all these things have contributed to these levers that John talked about the things that we are doing, which obviously will have an implication in the years ahead, because we've, through adversity, trialled some of these things.
Brian, I presume you're building on that theme.
Yes, yeah, it was really building on Angelina's question and Lizzie's response. I mean, as Angelina said, we're in this sort of challenge of annual budgets, but having to operate at a more strategic level, and it made me think that decision-making process, Ross, you know, have we more explicitly kind of built into it that sort of 3, 4, 5-year view of decisions now, so that, you know, is there that sort of discipline that in different situations you possibly wouldn't pay too much attention to, but given the criticality of it now. So I was just curious whether that's formally kind of built in, or is it still such a fluid situation that you're dealing with it as it happens?
Yeah, it would be disingenuous to say it's formally built in. We are aware of the potential scenarios that will play out through the resource spending review, and as we articulated the board a couple of weeks ago, we've got some initial thoughts regarding potential savings that we could make for next year, and we are now actually, the next scheduled meeting that we've got of SLT will look at the 2 to 4 year programme of work that we may need to undertake, and we will feed that into the away days at the end of next month. So we are starting that process of formalising that a bit more, Brian, and we'll bring the findings of that latest deliberations back to you at the end of next month.
Yeah, and just building on that, we have 2 full days which are laid out to take us through thinking about exactly some of the challenges that we are going to be facing as a board as we go through the strategic financial review and the restrictions of annual budgeting and the uncertainties around what future budgets might look like and their deviation from the figures that are indicated in the strategic financial review. So we're probably in the most complex territory we've been in since reform, but there is a very clear timeline around how we're going to address some of that, and some of those discussions have started and are coming on stream in the next few months to feel our way through. Thank you for the exploration of that area. Are we content on that basis to accept that we've scrutinised the resource budget monitoring report, and happy to move into the capital budget monitoring report? Lovely, thank you, John, again with you.
Thank you, Chair. Board members, this is to scrutinise and note the capital monitoring report for the 4 months to the end of July. I'm just going to pick up on a few things. There's some what's new in the report, there is some funding, environments, progress, and the kind of RAG status of projects and risk that I want to cover. So as part of the new, board members may recall that the Deloitte wider scope audit report asked for a number of actions to be progressed, and therefore as part of that, additional information on the progress of capital projects has been offered, and it includes a kind of RAG status of those overall programmes of work, and this will continue to be presented to the board in future months. There is also a new accounting standard. It's not that new, to be fair, but it's new in its application in public sector for leases, and we are expecting a switch in funding from the resource position to the capital position, and the overall view in terms of 22-23 is that will have an impact of £491,000 in this financial year. So that will be moving money from resource into capital, but it's the accounting treatment that forces that change rather than any kind of budgetary impact. In terms of funding, the funding for capital remains at £34.4 million. Board members will perhaps be aware that we made an application for some decarbonisation funding. £2.8 million was requested through the Net Zero. That has been progressed. We don't have a formal response yet, but the feedback is very positive. So just take note of that. In addition, we will be making a multi-year application in January 23, where they're allowing us to do multi-year for decarbonisation. So we will make an appropriate application at that point in time. And finally, a further application has been made to Transport Scotland for the EV infrastructure for £254,000, and that's to support the introduction of the new electric appliance. And again, we don't have any formal feedback on that, but we're getting positive support from Transport Scotland. Moving on to the budget environments, there was budget environments within the ICT expenditure line, and those were environments between or to PCs and laptops, and from telephony and operational mobilisation, and also there was some money wired into audiovisual kit. And I think the general theme around this is around supply chain, and we've had real difficulties in sourcing some of that ICT equipment. So we've been looking to try and make sure that we spend out in the areas that we need to spend out in, and accelerate some of that. There was also a bit of a backlog because of all things to do with COVID-19 in relation to the PCs, and we spent quite a bit of money on laptops because we needed to get our resources mobile, but we also have a programme of work around desktops, etc., for stations, and so there is an ongoing programme to make sure we refresh that IT, and that was why the kind of environments have happened in and around the kind of ICT area. In terms of the overall progress to the end of July, the capital committed or paid to date is just over 20.577 million, so about 60% of the budget is committed or paid, and we have also primarily accelerating still the West Arc that you can see from the board table today. I keep on thinking it should be more than the money that I've pressed the buttons on, but I'm sure that it is absolutely, the value is there. In terms of the RAG status, the RAG status of project milestones and that kind of deviation from budget has been highlighted. They're sitting at green at the moment. I do anticipate we had a capital monitoring meeting yesterday, and I do anticipate that some of those things will start to move into amber, and that just reflects the challenges that we're getting around the capital programme. It's nothing to be alarmed around. It's just more that we are starting to see some challenges around some of that supply chain, but we've been trailing that in terms of discussion all the way through this year, and I think it's to be expected in reality. But that still shouldn't stop us from spending out our overall capital position by the end of the financial year. And our levers around that are making sure that we are able to overcommit in particular areas and then drag that back so that we can then spend as much as we are required to maximise our capital spend. Because that's on the basis that the overall financial risk is really that our capital budget remains insufficient for the overall asset profile that we've got, and again that's well trodden ground, but our focus is very much making sure that we maximise that spend from our overall capital budget, and we don't want to lose a penny, literally don't want to lose a penny going forward. So that's the capital monitoring report for the period to the end of July, and again I'm welcome to open up to board members for questions.
Thank you, and if I can kick that off by saying well done for your persistence in applying for every single penny of capital that's available, either from other organisations such as Transport Scotland or bids from Scottish Government. As you indicate, we are very significantly underfunded in terms of capital for our basic requirements, so well done in maximising that. comments or questions around our capital monitoring report? No. Content, everybody happy with the both the content and the new structure?
Nothing to
No, no, that, well, there's an area to improve for future. We want more purple. No, thank you very much. Are we content we've scrutinised that? Thank you. That then takes us into our reports for information only, and we have tabling of the Youth Volunteer Scheme Evaluation Report. As we know, these reports are here for our information, unless there are very specific questions in relation to it. So it is tabled. If people have additional questions around it, then they are of course welcome either in advance to ask, to indicate that, or to contact the author of the paper. We're content that we have noted that for information. Thank you. And that takes us into our risk. And in fact, can I just say on that, passing that over as if it's unimportant, it's not. It's really important and really exciting. We have had the opportunity to see it elsewhere before it has come to the board. So there's, please don't let the fact that we're not asking questions or commenting on it devalue its importance. The work that is done is absolutely amazing, and as all of us have read the report, we are aware of that, and the scheme has huge ongoing support from the board because we know the difference it's making to the young people who are taking part, and the wider communities, in fact, where they're serving. So yes, please let's note that for the minute. That takes us into risk themes. Are there any additional risk themes that have been identified during this meeting that we do not already have clearly identified in the risk register or elsewhere? I mean, although there are some tricky and difficult issues that we've been discussing, I think this is deeply familiar territory for all of us at the moment, and we are discussing it elsewhere. Are we content just to note that we our current risk register does reflect those? Yep, please, Brian.
I think the short answer is yes. I think obviously there needs to be greater emphasis given to the financial position and the impacts on operational, but I'm sure that will happen, and we'll have the opportunity to look at that as we go forward. But there is an urgency to that. I mean, given that the comments that we've even heard today, that a decision taken today might not realise an efficiency for 12 months, or what's the operational impact. So it's just to kind of flag that we will need to probably look at the associated risks with much greater urgency.
Yeah. And we can take some assurance from Davy today that although there are difficult balances to be made in terms of money, resourcing and availability, it is being very actively managed, and that he is not identifying an increased risk to firefighters or communities, despite the challenges that we're currently experiencing. But that's something obviously needs to be a priority for the organisation going forward, and we know that our operational colleagues are highly focused on that. Thank you. Forward plan, we ask that you note this update. Is there anything on that we need to flag, Ali, or are we happy it's just been tabled?
Thank you, Chair. I think it was just to highlight to the board the approval by the Chair for the special board meeting to be held on the 9th of September, and that's just purely for the purpose of a timely reporting for the board in regard to the combined risk and performance report for Q1. So that's all, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. So having noted that the date of the next meeting is the 9th of September, it is a special one item agenda. Are we content that we close the formal public meeting and move into a break before resuming for private? So thank you very much, those who have joined us online to observe and those in the room, for your attendance at our public meeting, and with that we will close.